My name is Marcus Quinn, and I paid for that party. I knew at the moment I stepped through the gilded archway of the event hall, my shoes brushing against imported carpet that looked too clean to be real. The air smelled like lavender and expensive intentions. A string quartet played some soft rendition of something classical. I didn't recognize the piece, but I recognized the effort. Everything shimmered. Gold-accented balloons floated above white-draped tables, and champagne flutes caught the light like chandeliers in a palace. It was the kind of party that looked like a Pinterest dream board come to life. And every single dollar for it? Mine. I stood near the back, trying not to draw attention as guests laughed and floated from table to table in designer gowns and custom-tailored suits. Some nodded politely as they passed me. A few asked, "Are you with the catering team?" One woman handed me her empty glass with a quick, "Thanks," before moving on. I didn't correct her. What was the point? I wasn't wearing a suit, just a navy blue button-down with sleeves rolled up, the one I wore to job interviews when I still believed Soraya and I were building a future together. Her father, Reginald, was center stage as always, sipping champagne with a fake choke between chuckles, pretending the lobster canapes were too fancy for his taste. He clapped backs and told stories that ended in half-hearted laughs. Everyone humored him, the way people humor someone whose money speaks louder than his personality. And beside him, in radiant crimson, was Soraya, my wife, or at least, the woman who once looked at me like I was her world. Tonight, she barely glanced in my direction. She moved through the crowd like a queen on a chessboard, all strategy and grace, her hand fluttering with a glass of white wine, her smile polished and precise. It was her graduation party. Medical school, finished. For years, I remembered every damn payment. $8,000 each year. Not loans, not grants me. My late shifts, my early mornings, the warehouse contracts, the busted knuckles, the missed family birthdays. All of it funneled into her dream, like I was pouring my own blood into a funnel I was never meant to follow through. I used to joke we were partners, co-architects of a shared life. She used to laugh and kiss my temple and call me her foundation. Now I knew better. I was just scaffolding. Temporary. Necessary, but never meant to be seen once the structure was finished. They called for speeches just after dessert, a cascade of applause ringing out as Soraya took the stage. The spotlight made her skin glow like amber, and her voice, confident and steady, echoed across the hall. She thanked her professors, her colleagues, her friends. She thanked her parents for their emotional support and her mentors for their unwavering belief. Her voice trembled just enough to feel real. The room erupted in applause as she stepped back from the podium, and I took a step forward. I didn't plan to say much, just a few words. Congratulations. Pride. Maybe even gratitude, stupid as that sounds now. But as I reached the first step leading up to the stage, she turned and smiled. Not the kind of smile you give a partner. It was too tight, too sharp. Her lips barely moved when she said, "Your job is done. You shouldn't be here." I blinked, stopped mid-step. Surely, I misheard. Maybe it was the music. Maybe she meant I could relax now. But then her mother, Greta, with her trademark silver shawl and daggered words, leaned in close behind her daughter and said, "You don't know your place, Marcus." She didn't whisper. She didn't pull me aside. She said it with volume, with teeth, and the kind of self-satisfied smirk that made my stomach curdle. And then she laughed. Loud. Cruel. As if I was the punchline of some private joke they'd been practicing for months. I remember looking around, wondering if anyone else saw what I saw, the venom in their mouths, the ease with which they dismissed me. But most were too far gone in champagne and music to notice. A few turned their heads but quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved, not wanting to break the illusion of celebration. So I did the only thing I could. I nodded, not out of agreement, but out of clarity. It clicked, right then. All of it. The late nights, the ignored messages, the way her affection had cooled slowly over time like a dying ember. This wasn't new. It wasn't sudden. It was strategic. I gave her a smile, not sharp like hers, not cruel like her mother's. Mine was calm, peaceful, even. The kind of smile a man wears when the weight on his back is finally lifted, even if it leaves a scar. Then I turned and walked out. No scene, no shouts, just footsteps. Me, out the same door I entered, into the warm night air that smelled faintly of lilies and expensive catering. The valet looked confused when I didn't hand him a ticket. I had parked down the street, away from the glitz and noise. As I walked to my car, I felt the silence settle around me, not empty, but clarifying. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A message from my cousin, probably asking how the party was going. I didn't respond. I just unlocked the car, sat down, and let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like myself again. Not a sponsor. Not a stepping stone. Just Marcus Quinn. The man who paid for the party, who gave everything to a woman who smiled like a blade, and who finally knew exactly where he stood. Outside. But free. They never asked where the money came from. Not once. Soraya's parents assumed she got some secret scholarship or financial grant reserved for the special few. And Soraya? She let them believe that. No correction. No clarification. Just a gentle smile and a change of subject every time tuition came up. At first, I chalked it up to modesty. I thought maybe she didn't want to parade our personal finances in front of her judgmental family. But eventually, I realized it was something else. She was ashamed, not of needing help, but of where that help came from. Me. We were barely 3 months into our marriage when the first payment was due. I still remember the way she curled up on the couch beside me, her head on my shoulder, whispering that she didn't want to take out another loan, that the debt was already suffocating. "We'll figure it out," I said without hesitation. She looked at me like I'd handed her the moon. "You always fix things," she told me. And I took that as love, as faith. I didn't realize it was permission. The next week, I picked up a second shift at the packaging plant. Midnight runs unloading crates and navigating forklifts through dim corridors that always smelled like dust and sweat. I kept my main job, too, IT support for a medical billing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Both jobs together gave me just enough cushion. Not comfort, not ease, just cushion. Enough to carve out $8,000 without missing rent. Enough to scrape together something that looked like support and sacrifice without falling completely apart. But it came at a price. I stopped buying new shoes. The soles on my work boots thinned until I could feel the shape of the ground beneath me. I skipped dental checkups. When my molar cracked one morning on a half-stale granola bar, I just spit the blood out and kept going. I started renting our car out on weekends through a peer-share app, let strangers drive it around while I stayed home, and watched YouTube tutorials on how to fix leaking faucets and power cycling servers. We didn't go on vacations. Didn't order takeout. If she noticed, she never said. There were nights I came home and collapsed into the armchair in our living room, my arms trembling from lifting crates for 10 hours straight. She'd be studying at the dining table, flashcards spread out like playing cards. "You okay?" she'd ask without looking up. I'd nod. I always nodded. Just tired. That was the phrase I clung to like a lifeboat. Just tired. Not drowning. Not aching. Not breaking down in quiet, invisible pieces. Just tired. One night, I offered to show her how I'd managed to pull together the full amount again. I thought maybe she'd want to see the spreadsheet I'd built, the careful way I shifted bills around, the Uber payments, the bonuses, the overtime. I opened my laptop, eyes burning with pride as I walked her through the formula. She barely glanced at it. "I don't want you working 2 jobs, she said, her voice soft but flat. "I want quality time with you." What she meant was, I want results. I just don't want to see the cost. So I closed the laptop. Told her I'd figure it out. And I did. Again and again. For 4 straight years. The $8,000 became a ritual. A deadline I honored like scripture. I never gave it to her in bits or partial payments. Always the full amount. In an envelope, sometimes with a post-it. "You've got this. Proud of you." She'd take it with a kiss and a smile, and then tuck it away. Never once did she say thank you in a way that felt like it reached her soul. It was more like the way you thank a vending machine for delivering what you asked for. Her parents were convinced she had won some invisible financial lottery. She always was gifted, Greta would say at brunches, sipping mimosas with her pinky out like she was starring in a reality show. Smart enough to earn her own way. Reginald would nod, then pivot the conversation toward his golf handicap or the new leather seats in his imported SUV. I would just sit there, invisible, letting them build a myth out of a truth I lived and bled for. One afternoon during her 3rd year, she called me between rounds and said, "My study group wants to celebrate passing the boards. Can we swing dinner at that place on 7th, the one with the seafood towers?" I blinked at the phone like it had grown teeth. We were barely making rent that month because the truck gig had slowed down, and I was recovering from bronchitis I couldn't afford to treat. But I said yes. I pulled from our emergency fund, swapped a weekend shift, and that night, I watched her toast with champagne she barely sipped, surrounded by classmates who never once asked what I did, only who I was to her. She introduced me as Marcus, my husband, like I was a fixture, a piece of furniture she admired when it was polished, but never really thought about when it went dull. By the final year, I'd stopped hoping she'd give me credit. I stopped waiting for the moment she'd say, "This degree is ours." I knew it was hers. All hers. What I hadn't realized until the party, until that smile sharper than glass, was that she didn't even want the crowd to know I had touched it at all. She wanted them to believe she climbed that mountain with wind beneath her wings, not with a man at the bottom holding the ladder steady while the rungs cut into his palms. The irony? I was proud of her, genuinely, even with the silence, even with the omissions. I believed in her brilliance. I believed in the life we could have built together. What I didn't know was that she had already built it, just not with me in it. So when she smiled that night and said, "Your job is done," I realized that was all I'd ever been. A job, a stepping stone, a paycheck in the shape of a man. And like all jobs eventually do, mine had an end date. The thing about humiliation is, it rarely announces itself. It creeps up quietly, settles into your bones, and waits for just the right moment to shatter your self-worth. That moment for me came somewhere between the second round of toasts and the first serving of dessert, when I realized that every other spouse had a seat, except me. I don't even know when it started feeling wrong. Maybe it was when I walked in and no one at the entrance had my name on their list. "Guest of Dr. Quinn?" the young woman at the check-in table asked with a bland smile. "Soraya," I corrected. "I'm her husband." Her smile didn't even flicker. She handed me a generic white name tag with no seat assignment and pointed toward the back with a faint, apologetic nod, like I was someone who'd wandered into the wrong event, but she didn't have the heart to escort me out. The room was dazzling, round tables draped in ivory linen, gold-rimmed plates, fresh orchids at every centerpiece. The lighting was soft and romantic, casting a honeyed glow across faces flushed with wine and pride. This wasn't a party. It was a coronation, and Soraya was the crown jewel. She looked stunning, of course, the kind of beautiful that made people stare without realizing their mouths were open. Her dress clung just enough to make a statement, and her laughter rang out like bells whenever someone complimented her. "You've done it, Soraya," one of her classmates gushed. "Independent. Self-made. It's so inspiring." I stood at the edge of the room, holding a sweating glass of club soda and wondering where I fit in. I spotted the husbands and wives of other graduates nestled beside them, exchanging knowing glances, hands brushing over knees, the kind of quiet intimacy that only comes from walking a journey together. One guy leaned over and kissed his wife's temple while she laughed at a joke. Another held his wife's hand under the table while she teared up during a tribute speech. Real partners, real presence. And me? I was an echo against a wall, waiting for someone to notice the space I used to occupy. When I asked one of the servers if they could help me find my seat, he scanned the list on his clipboard and said, "There's no place card for Marcus Quinn, but there are some open seats at the back near the bar." He smiled like he was doing me a favor. "You'll have a great view of the stage." I sat down on a flimsy chair at the edge of the room, far from the flower arrangements and champagne flutes. I could still see her, still hear her laughter, but I might as well have been on another planet. People passed by me on their way to the restroom or to refill their drinks. No one looked twice. And then I heard Greta. She was standing near the dessert table, a glass of wine in one hand, her voice just loud enough to carry, but quiet enough to seem unintentional. "He was always temporary," she said. We all knew that. There was a pause, followed by polite chuckles. "Honestly," she added, "we were just waiting for her to outgrow him." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stared at the condensation sliding down the side of my glass and tried to will it into washing away the sting. But it didn't. It burned. Every syllable. Every implication. Temporary. A stepping stone. A convenience. Not one of them had the decency to look ashamed. It wasn't the first time she had tried to erase me. There were other signs, smaller but sharper in hindsight. Times I was cropped out of social media posts. Events I found out about after the fact. "Oh, it was just girls from the hospital. You wouldn't have enjoyed it." Study group trips I wasn't invited to because it was all last minute. I used to tell myself she needed her space, that she was under pressure and didn't want distractions. But this was planned. I was uninvited to a life I helped pay for. As her friends clinked glasses and talked about residencies and next chapters, I watched her hold court like royalty. She wasn't thinking about me, not even a glance in my direction. It was as if, once her degree arrived, I had been erased from the final draft of her story, a ghost at a party built on my sacrifices. When the lights dimmed for the closing slideshow, I stood, quietly. No drama, no goodbye, just the soft sound of my chair scraping the floor. No one noticed, not even her. I slipped through the exit, the thick double doors parting like curtains at the end of a play where the hero never got his bow. The night air was cool and heavy, the kind of weight that reminds you you're still alive, even when everything inside you feels numb. I walked to the car I had parked down the street, passing parked luxury sedans and rented town cars. The silence in my chest wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something colder, emptier, like finding out you were never in the photograph to begin with. You'd just mistaken your reflection for inclusion. I sat in the driver's seat, keys in hand, staring at the glow of the building through the windshield. For a brief second, I wondered if I should go back in. Maybe cause a scene. Maybe demand acknowledgement. But then what? Make a public claim on someone who had already cut me out of the frame? No. I had too much dignity left to barter it for pity. So I drove. Windows down. Music low. Each red light felt like a question I no longer needed to answer. I didn't head home immediately. I drove around the city we used to dream in, past the old bookstore we loved, the taco truck where she cried about failing her first anatomy quiz, the clinic where I once waited 3 hours with flowers just to walk her to the car after a long shift. All of it still there, but none of it mine anymore. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the house I paid for, it hit me all over again. I had built a life where I was the only one who hadn't been invited to stay. I left the porch light on, left the door unlocked, let them come home to whatever version of reality they believed in. I wouldn't be there to interrupt it. Somewhere inside that house, there was still a version of me folded into the sheets and the walls and the receipts. But the man who parked the car that night stepped out and locked the door behind him. He was done waiting for a seat. When they got back that night, I was already gone. But the house was spotless, lights dimmed low, air faintly scented with the orange vanilla candles Soraya liked. Everything in its place, everything arranged just as she would have liked it, just as I always tried to make it. The only thing different was the box sitting in the middle of the coffee table. No note, no ribbon, just a plain cardboard box with the top folded shut, like an ordinary delivery waiting to be opened. But this box wasn't ordinary. This box was truth. Inside it, I'd packed every piece of paper that mattered. Every tuition receipt, photocopies, neatly labeled by year and payment method. From the bank drafts I pulled from our checking account to the Venmo transactions marked for S, each one a quiet testament to a sacrifice she never publicly acknowledged. I'd placed them in a manila folder and scrawled across the front in black marker, in case anyone forgets who invested first. Next to it, I included a signed copy of the house deed. Not a copy for her, the copy. The one that bore my signature from the closing day and hers, absent. Because the down payment had come from my late grandfather's inheritance. And because when she said she didn't want to be burdened with mortgage paperwork, I told myself it was trust, not indifference. Now, it felt like a foreshadowing I had been too naive to read. Her car title came next. A clean payoff stamped and notarized last December. I remembered that moment vividly, how she squealed when I handed her the keys and said, "It's all yours." She kissed me, snapped a photo, posted it to her story with the caption, "Spoiled today." #blessed. No mention of me. Just a car and a hashtag. Then came my signed withdrawal from our joint account. It wasn't an act of war, it was protection. A simple document stating that I no longer had any intention of maintaining shared finances with someone who shared nothing else with me anymore. It included transfer confirmations, timestamps, and the name of a private savings bank in a city 6 hours away. She'd find the balance intact. I hadn't stolen. I hadn't hidden. I just reclaimed. The last item in the box was the key. Small, silver, and attached to a bright red tag labeled Lockbox, Hillside Storage. She'd know the place. We once joked about renting a unit there for holiday decorations. What she wouldn't expect was that I'd quietly rented 1 month ago when the distance between us turned from subtle to surgical. Inside the lockbox were backup drives, contracts, employment records from both my jobs, voice memos, even recordings. Not vindictive, just insurance. I had lived too long under the assumption that love protected you. Now I knew better. Paper did. I didn't want it to feel theatrical. I wanted it to feel factual, documented, final. If Soraya or Greta came looking for a narrative to twist, I wanted the facts to scream louder than their stories. And when they entered the house that night, drunk on applause and champagne, I imagined their footsteps slowing as they spotted the box. I imagined Soraya's heels clicking to a halt, Greta's hiss of disapproval, maybe even a scoff about me being dramatic. But it wouldn't matter, because I was gone, and not just for the night. For good. I'd packed my essentials that afternoon. 2 suitcases, a duffel bag, my laptop, a framed photo of my parents on their wedding day, and a manila envelope labeled Freedom that held everything I needed to start over. New address, new bank info, new life plans. I had driven for 4 hours before pulling into a roadside motel just past state lines. Not because I didn't have a place to stay, I did. A small rental near the coast was already secured in my name. But I wanted the distance. I wanted the silence. Lying on the motel bed, stiff sheets tucked too tightly, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the party in my mind. Her smile. Greta's laugh. The way no one stopped me when I walked out. It didn't hurt anymore. Not the way it used to. It was a clean ache now, like a healed scar that only itched when the weather changed. I thought about the house as I remembered it. The cracks in the living room paint I kept meaning to fix. The squeaky hinge on the bathroom door. The shelf I built in the kitchen for her spice jars, alphabetized, just the way she liked them. It wasn't just a house. It was a record of every quiet thing I'd done to make her life easier, to give her space to dream. And she had taken that space and turned it into a stage where I was never meant to appear. She would likely see the box as petty, or manipulative, or desperate. But none of those things were true. It wasn't anger that made me leave it. It was clarity. If I had simply disappeared, she would have spun a story of abandonment. Poor Soraya, left by her husband when she finally succeeded. But the box told another story, a quieter one. One that didn't require raised voices or public declarations. Just evidence. Quiet, undeniable evidence. I imagined her picking up each document with trembling fingers, reading and rereading, trying to rewrite what was already written in ink. And Greta, her hawk eye scanning for a loophole, only to find none. Because the truth wasn't hidden. It had always been right there. She just never bothered to look. There was a part of me that wondered if Soraya would try to reach out. To call. To explain. But I had changed my number before the sun went down. I didn't want closure. I didn't need it. I had lived for too long in a house where my voice was background noise and my presence was treated like furniture, useful, but unworthy of spotlight. I wasn't interested in hearing apologies curated for optics. I wanted silence. I wanted peace. The next morning, I sat on the motel balcony with a black coffee and a folded map, tracing my finger along the coastal towns I might settle in. Somewhere with less noise. Fewer people trying to prove their worth through degrees and dinner parties. I didn't know yet what the next version of my life looked like, but I knew it wouldn't be built on the premise that love must be earned through exhaustion. The house I paid for, the one where my name was on every bill, every repair, every piece of it, was no longer mine. Not because she took it, but because I gave it freely, foolishly, and without limit. And that kind of giving, when done without reciprocity, doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible. So I left the box. And I left the house. Not to punish. Not to shock. But to say, in the only language they respected, this was never yours to claim without me. Greta always thought she was the smartest person in the room. She didn't just enter spaces, she occupied them like she'd paid rent for decades. Even her voice had a smug rhythm to it, always resting one octave above polite so she could control the tempo of every conversation. So when she pitched the idea of opening a wellness clinic for prestige, I knew better than to argue. Just a formality, she'd said with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. A side venture. Something Soraya and I can put our names on while you handle the boring paperwork. What she meant was, we need your name, your credit, your reputation. Because for all her pomp, Greta had burned through her own name years ago. Bad investments, unpaid taxes, an unpaid lease on a botched spa project. Her financial trail was a graveyard of almost successes. But mine? Mine was clean, untouched, reliable. So when she needed a name to legitimize the LLC for Quintessence Wellness, she came to me with a bottle of top-shelf bourbon and a favor disguised as a compliment. You're so organized, Marcus, she purred, so detail-oriented. I just trust you to set it up right. And I did. I set it up perfectly. I registered the business, created the account, structured the financial backend with a separation clause they didn't even notice buried in the fine print. On paper, I was a silent partner. But I wasn't silent when I opened the online banking dashboard and linked my name as the primary controller of the funds. Not because I planned to steal, but because I knew sooner or later they'd try to cut me out. That morning, I woke up in a small coastal town where no one knew my name, the ocean whispering through a cracked motel window. I stretched, brewed weak coffee in the dented pot, and sat down with my laptop. The screen glowed as I logged in. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for just a moment. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming control. At exactly 7:01 a.m., I clicked the Freeze Account button. One click. That was it. The funds, nearly $64,000 from investors and early client deposits, were immediately inaccessible. The screen updated. Account status: frozen. Primary holder authorization required for unlock. I closed the laptop, took a sip of the coffee, then leaned back in the rickety motel chair and waited for the sound to start traveling. It didn't take long. By 8:22 a.m., my phone, which still worked for this purpose only, buzzed with a text from Soraya. Just one word: Marcus? Then came a string of calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew the chaos unfolding on the other end. Greta, standing in her kitchen in that ridiculous silk robe, trying to pay the caterer's final invoice for the graduation party and getting declined. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound of her wine glass hitting the marble countertop. The accusing glare she turned on Soraya. The frantic calls to the bank. And then, realization. I could see it clearly without being there. Greta storming into Soraya's room, phone in hand, demanding answers. What did he do? What the hell did he do? Soraya, confused, maybe even panicked, swiping through her apps trying to access the account and getting the same message: access denied. The last time I saw Greta lose control was during their New Year's Eve party 2 years ago when someone spilled red wine on her Persian rug. She'd nearly clawed the caterer's eyes out. This would break her. Because money, to Greta, wasn't just power, it was identity. And someone had just changed the locks on her name. I heard from Raina, our neighbor, around noon. She sent a message that simply read, "Did you shut down the clinic account? Because Greta is throwing things. Like crystal things." Then a follow-up, also, "Well done. Well done." It wasn't about spite. I wasn't looking to bankrupt anyone. But Greta had counted on my silence. My compliance. She thought I'd disappear cleanly, that I'd take my heartbreak and vanish without leaving fingerprints. But what she didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I had paid for everything with intention. And when you pay for something, you earn a say in how it ends. She must have called a lawyer, maybe even the bank manager. But it wouldn't matter. The fine print in the founding documents made it clear, without my written approval, the funds were locked. Permanently. And that approval wasn't coming. I imagined her trying to explain it to Soraya, who probably stood there silent, the way she always did when her mother took over. They would spiral, and I wouldn't be there to catch either of them. That thought gave me more peace than I expected. Around 3 p.m., I opened the laptop again. A few more notifications blinked across the screen. Attempted logins, password reset requests, a flagged security alert from someone trying to reroute the bank access to a new email. All denied. I chuckled to myself. You'd think someone so obsessed with image would have thought to read the bylaws before signing. I took the rest of the day to walk along the pier in the new town. The sea air was sharp and clean, the kind that fills your lungs like clarity. I passed a bookstore, a tiny bakery, a thrift shop that had a vintage coffee table in the window. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't thinking about how to keep someone else's dream afloat. I was thinking about what it meant to build something of my own. Back at the motel, I found a message waiting in my inbox. From Soraya. No subject line. Just a short paragraph. "I don't know what you think you're proving. You've made your point. Can we talk? Not about the money, about us." I stared at it for a long time. Not because it moved me, but because it was the first time in months she'd referred to us as an us. But there was no us. Not anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it, either. I let it sit there like a digital fossil, proof of a time when she thought the door was still open. It wasn't. I had walked through it, locked it, and dropped the key into the ocean on my way out of town. As night fell, I poured myself a whiskey and stepped out onto the tiny motel balcony. In the distance, a couple walked hand in hand, laughing over something too simple to explain. I didn't envy them. I didn't want what they had. I just wanted something real, something honest, something earned without pretense. Greta's frozen accounts weren't about revenge. They were about acknowledgement, about drawing a line, about telling the world, and myself, that I was no longer a footnote in someone else's empire. I was the man who paid for the lights, installed the foundation, and finally, when no one was looking, turned off the switch. Some actions don't need fireworks to be effective. Sometimes the softest touch is the one that lands hardest. Soraya's out-of-state fellowship interview was supposed to be her final leap, her polished exit from the life we'd shared, the golden ticket into the elite. I remember how excited she was when the email came in. She'd sat across from me at the dining table, the screen glowing against her cheekbone like a spotlight. "It's happening," she whispered, and I nodded like a man should. Supportive, quiet, forgettable. But I hadn't forgotten. Not the party. Not the look in her eyes when she told me, "Your job is done." Not the laughter from Greta, ringing in my ears like a door slamming shut behind me. That moment had calcified something inside me. And so, I made a call. Amir Das and I had history. We weren't best friends, but we respected each other. Years ago, when his small clinic systems were crashing under the weight of bad coding and missing data, I rebuilt his infrastructure for next to nothing. No invoice. No contract. Just the understanding that if I ever needed something, he'd remember. The kind of old-school favor no one expects to cash in. I called him on a Thursday evening. He picked up on the second ring. "Marcus," he said, sounding surprised. "Man, it's been a while. You good?" I paused for a moment. "Not really," I admitted. "I need a favor." He didn't hesitate. "Talk to me." I told him everything. Not just the betrayal, not just the party, but the truth beneath the surface. The tuition payments, the dual jobs, the business account under my name that Greta tried to funnel money through, the quiet financial suffocation, the narrative they crafted without me. He listened in silence. "Is she still applying to our fellowship program?" he finally asked. "She is, or was. The interview's next week." A long exhale whistled through the line. "Damn, I'm not asking you to blacklist her," I said carefully. "I'm just giving you the full picture. If she's going to present herself as someone built from nothing, you deserve to know who she stepped over to get there." I could hear him typing, clicking through files on his end. "Email me everything," he said. And so I did. A full dossier. Scans of tuition receipts under my name. Screenshots of text messages. Some subtle, others blunt, where she talked about being almost free or needing just a little more from Marcus. I included a written statement of our financial arrangement. Even clipped audio from a conversation we'd had 2 years ago where she admitted, "I hate lying to my parents, but they wouldn't understand how much you do." I sent it all, hit upload, and closed the laptop without fanfare. Then I waited. 3 days later, the silence broke. I was sitting on the porch of my new rental. The breeze rolled off the sea with a salt-stung chill, and my coffee had gone cold in my hand. My phone buzzed on the armrest. It was Raina again. She screamed, her message read. Then, like people down the hall called security level screamed. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just a quiet kind of release. Like I had been holding my breath for too long and had finally exhaled. Later that night, I got a short email from Amir. It wasn't long. Just a subject line. Fellowship interview. Conflict of interest. In the body, he wrote, "We've decided to re-evaluate Soraya Quinn's application. Thank you for your honesty. I hope you find peace." I read it twice, then deleted it. I didn't need to save proof. I didn't need to share it. The domino had fallen, and that was enough. Word spread quickly. The medical world is tight-knit, especially among elite programs. Whispers start fast, and reputations shift even faster. All it takes is a suggestion of impropriety for doors to close. No one wants to be the program that brought in the applicant with the scandal. It's bad press. A bad bet. She must have felt the shift. Maybe other interviews grew colder. Maybe replies slowed. The image she'd crafted, that of the self-made, unstoppable prodigy, began to chip. Not shattered, not ruined, but no longer perfect. Imperfection was everything to her. I imagined her pacing the apartment, trying to call Amir, leaving voicemails she'd never admit to. Maybe Greta was there too, pacing like a general on a battlefield, tossing out phrases like, "We'll sue," or "This is defamation." But there was nothing to sue. No falsehoods to correct. Just facts. Clean, quiet facts. Soraya once told me, people don't really want the truth. They want the version that flatters them. She was right. And that was the version she'd presented to Amir, to the fellowship board, to herself. But reality has teeth. And when it bites, it doesn't let go gently. I didn't dance. I didn't gloat. That's not who I am. I just went for a walk that night. A long, slow walk through the empty coastal streets of a town that didn't know my name or my story. A place where no one asked me to prove my value or defend my worth. I bought a sandwich from a quiet cafe, sat on a bench, and listened to the waves lapping against the rocks like clockwork. Later, back in my apartment, I found an unread message from her. Subject, please. Just that word. I hovered my cursor over it, then clicked. The email was short, disjointed. No hi, no Marcus. Just, I don't know why you're doing this. You said you wanted peace. This feels cruel. I closed the message. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed what I'd known all along. She didn't see it. She didn't see the months I spent behind the wheel, driving through rainstorms to make just enough for another installment. She didn't see the cold meals, the ignored fevers, the missed birthdays. She didn't see the weight I carried while she climbed. She only saw the fallout. That was the problem. People like Soraya think consequences are cruelty, that being held accountable is malice. But I hadn't lied. I hadn't smeared her name. I'd simply offered someone the truth and let them decide. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down in the armchair beside the window. The stars were faint, scattered across the sky like someone had shaken them loose. Somewhere, in another apartment, she was probably crying. Maybe angry, maybe lost. But I wasn't there to fix it. That wasn't my job anymore. She said I was done. She was right. I didn't have to post anything. I didn't have to tweet, blog, vent, or unleash a single word to the public. The truth, when it's ripe enough, leaks on its own. Maybe it was James, my cousin with the righteous anger and the screen recording habit, or maybe Raina, who lived 2 doors down and had a sharp memory for injustice. Maybe someone overheard something they weren't meant to. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. But one morning, as I sipped lukewarm coffee in my new apartment on the coast, my phone began to vibrate like a hive set loose. It started with a text from a guy I hadn't spoken to in months, Derek, from Soraya's old study group. Bro, is this real? Attached was a screenshot of a Venmo transaction labeled Greta Cover-Up, with a string of laughing emojis underneath. I stared at it. My chest didn't tighten. My stomach didn't drop. I just stared, blinked once, and placed the phone down beside my coffee. I already knew it was real. I made the payments. I remembered the notes she used to type casual little codes like Rent Plus or Wellness Boost. But someone had connected the dots, dragged them into the light, and now the truth was stretching its legs in public. An hour later, more screenshots surfaced. This time, group chats. Someone posted a text from Soraya's number. Just a little more from Marcus and I'm out. One more tuition check and I can finally breathe. Another one read, he's sweet, but he's not my future. Just the bridge. The messages spread fast, clipped and reshared, dropped into group threads that exploded with commentary. People gasped. People speculated. And a few, quietly and carefully, started reaching out to me. My inbox, once silent and stale, started to hum. Former classmates. Old neighbors. A couple of her classmates who had always looked at me with vague politeness now sent apologies laced with disbelief. But one message stood out. It was from one of Soraya's mentors, a woman named Dr. Eloise Banks, a name I knew from stories but had never met. She messaged me directly. No fluff. No fanfare. Just this. You deserved better. You still do. That message hit me harder than anything else. Because she didn't know me kindness. She wasn't part of my circle. She had no reason to reach across the silence and offer dignity. And yet, she did. In 9 words, she affirmed what I hadn't said aloud, that I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was simply human. Someone who had given too much and been returned far too little. By noon, people had started connecting names and timelines. Someone reposted a graduation photo of Soraya, zooming in on the caption where she thanked her day ones and everyone who believed in her. No mention of a husband. No thanks for the man who sat in the dark every night learning how to manage freight logistics just to pay another $8,000. Someone else commented, funny how she never mentioned Marcus, but she had time to shout out her last tech. I never liked gossip. I never needed validation in whispers. But this wasn't gossip. This was truth rising to the surface after being drowned for too long. And the internet, for all its pettiness, has one sacred rule. When the receipts are real, silence becomes guilt. By evening, I had received over 20 messages, some from people I barely remembered. One guy, a mutual from an old wedding, wrote, "I used to think you were just the quiet guy with no ambition. Now I see you were the spine." That one made me sit still for a while. The spine. Not flashy, not loud, but necessary. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't defended myself. But still, the narrative changed. The same people who called Soraya self-made were now resharing her text with captions like, "This is not the way you treat people." And Greta, well, I imagine Greta's phone must have been burning in her hand. The kind of fire that spreads when you've spent years striking matches under your breath and suddenly the air turns combustible. I imagined her pacing, calling Soraya, demanding damage control. But there was no PR strategy for this kind of truth. You can't spin screenshots. You can't dress betrayal in designer clothes and expect it to pass. Still, I said nothing. I didn't share. I didn't react. I just watched. Because for the first time, the truth didn't need me to speak for it. And that, more than any revenge fantasy, gave me peace. By midnight, I took one last scroll through the notifications, then powered off my phone. I stood by the window of my new place, listening to the ocean scratch against the shore. No parties. No toasts. No mothers-in-law trying to correct my posture or tone. Just water and wind and breath. I didn't want to be a martyr. I didn't want to be a headline. I just wanted to be free. And now, finally, I was. By the time the divorce papers landed on my doorstep, forwarded from our old address to the small mailbox tucked beneath my new apartment number, Soraya had already lost most of her audience. The applause had quieted. The sympathy had thinned. Even Greta's sharp little voice had stopped echoing through the digital halls of group chats and alumni boards. That was the thing about the truth. It didn't just leak, it stained. And stains don't wash out easily, no matter how pretty the fabric. She tried to delay the inevitable. I could see it in the hesitations, in the legal phrasing that clung to vague claims of misunderstanding and emotional distress. At first, she didn't want the divorce to be fast. She wanted time, probably to regroup, to regain control of the story, to flip it again into something more palatable. But control had slipped, and this wasn't her story anymore. It was ours. Or more accurately, mine, finally. When I first met Nadine Chun, my lawyer, she sat across from me in a modest office wearing thick-framed glasses and a red blazer with the confidence of someone who had already won cases before introductions finished. She didn't coddle. She didn't smile much. She just listened. I laid it all out. Every tuition receipt, every screenshot, every account I'd frozen, and every line she'd crossed while the world called her self-made. Nadine didn't flinch. She just flipped through the file, page by page, until she set it down and said, "We'll make it clean. You're not here for a war. You're here for freedom." Exactly. I wasn't interested in dragging Soraya through mud. That would mean I still cared. I didn't. I just wanted out, with dignity, with closure, and with everything I had left intact. When Soraya's legal team came forward with their first argument, it was laughable. They suggested emotional coercion, that I had used money as a method of control, that I had manipulated her educational journey through financial dependency. Nadine laughed out loud, once, sharp and dry. Then she slid the affidavits across the table. Statements from my supervisors, payment logs from the part-time warehouse job, and the text from Soraya herself admitting she couldn't believe how lucky she got to have someone so easy to maneuver. It wasn't just checkmate, it was surrender. In our second and final court session, the judge barely said more than a paragraph. He skimmed the file, took off his glasses, and looked at me as if trying to piece together what kind of man would fund a future he was never invited to be part of. Then he looked at her, silent, red-eyed, lips pressed tight as her lawyer whispered something she didn't seem to hear. "Divorce granted," the judge said. "Mr. Quinn, you are cleared of all allegations. Asset division not applicable. No spousal support required." The gavel fell. She didn't even look at me as she left. She just gathered her purse and walked out with her mother one step behind her. Greta, dressed in dark gray like she was attending a funeral, glared at me once over her shoulder before disappearing through the double doors. The click of their heels down the hall was the last sound I heard before the room went silent. Nadine shook my hand. "That's it," she said. "You're out." I didn't smile. Not yet. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like a release. On the way home, I didn't take the highway. I took the long way, through the parts of the city we used to drive through during late-night study breaks. I passed the food truck she loved, the bookstore we never had time to explore. Places that used to hold meaning now passed like old wallpaper, visible, but no longer part of my structure. When I reached my place, the sun was already tipping west. The light was soft, golden, warm in that way that makes things feel possible again. I stood by the window with a glass of water in my hand and watched the waves curl against the shore. I hadn't packed the glassware Soraya picked out. This one was mine, cheap, a little scratched, but solid. I thought back to the early days, back when she used to fall asleep studying on the couch with her head on my lap, when she said things like, "I couldn't do this without you," and I believed her. Back when I thought love meant giving without measure. Now I understood better. Love isn't debt. It isn't a currency you trade for gratitude. It's not a contract. It's a mirror. And when someone refuses to look into it, when they only see you as leverage, a step, a sacrifice, they were never looking at you in the first place. That night, I didn't celebrate. I just slept. And for the first time in years, I didn't dream of her. There's something strangely beautiful about rebuilding your life when no one's watching. No audience. No pressure. Just you, the dust, and your own two hands. I didn't arrive at the coast with a grand plan. I arrived with boxes, silence, and a heartbeat that was finally steady. The rental was small. Nothing like the house I'd poured my savings into. But it had good bones. A sturdy frame. And it was mine. I kept things simple. A mattress on the floor for the first few weeks. A chipped coffee table from a thrift shop. Mismatched dishes. I didn't care. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't performing. I was just living. I spent my mornings walking the shore with coffee and a thermos and sand in my shoes. In the evenings, I read until my eyelids gave out. No curated images, no filtered posts. Just pages. Peace. I didn't talk much those first few months. I didn't need to. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was healing. But I couldn't stay still forever. I'd built a career keeping other people's systems running. Clinics. Small hospitals. Billing platforms that never worked the way they promised in glossy brochures. I knew the flaws. I knew how to fix them. More importantly, I knew how to build something better. So I did. I started small. One client. An overworked clinic in a town 30 minutes inland. Their files were a mess. Their appointment system crashed twice a week. And their billing software was eating half their revenue in hidden fees. I cleaned it up. Gave them something streamlined, efficient, honest. They paid on time. Sent referrals. And slowly, like a ripple in still water, the work grew. Within 6 months, I had 5 clients. Then 9. I hired a part-time assistant, Mara, a single mom with a background in admin and the kind of grit that reminded me of who I used to be. Together, we built something sustainable. Not flashy, not headline-worthy, but real. A consulting firm for mid-tier medical offices. Honest work. Clean data. Clear results. I called it Coastal Systems, not because it sounded sleek, but because it reminded me of where I'd started again. Then came the email from the editor. A quiet little op-ed request from a regional journal that focused on healthcare ethics and provider support. They'd heard about my story through one of my clients, Dr. Halim, who'd seen the text leaks online and, rather than turn away, had leaned in. The piece they published was titled, "The Man Behind Her Degree, When Support Becomes a Trap." It wasn't dramatic. No names. No accusations. Just facts. My name, my journey, my truth. How support can turn into silence. How giving too much without reciprocation becomes invisible labor. How many men and women pour themselves out in the shadows while the world cheers for someone else's spotlight. I didn't expect much from it. But a month later, a woman walked into my office with a notepad and a nervous smile. Her name was Zaria. She said she'd read the piece 3 times. That it felt familiar. That she had been raised by a father who disappeared into the background so her mother could shine. That she was trying to make sure her future didn't look like that. She didn't ask for a job. She asked for advice. We talked. About business. About ethics. About growth that didn't come at the cost of someone else's worth. She asked good questions. Listened more than she spoke. And when she left, she said, "This might sound weird, but thank you for not sounding bitter." I laughed. It's not weird. It's rare. She came back a week later. Brought lunch. A few spreadsheets she wanted me to look over. The week after that, dinner. It wasn't fast. It wasn't hot and wild like it had been with Soraya. It was slow, warm, steady, and honest. We talked about failure like it was a teacher. We talked about success like it was something you carry, not something you wear. No secrets. No debts. Just truth. She told me about her startup ideas. I told her about the mistakes I refused to repeat. Somewhere between late-night coffee and early morning walks, we found something that felt like hope. The kind that doesn't ask for payment. The kind that doesn't ask you to shrink. And me? I wasn't a support beam anymore. I was the house. The call came on a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs heavy with clouds that never quite break, and the world moves just a little slower. I had just come back from the farmer's market with Zarya, fresh figs, a loaf of sourdough, a small jar of jam from a vendor who always threw in a crooked smile with his samples. She was in the kitchen now, humming something soft while she brewed tea, and I was unpacking bags when the unknown number lit up my phone. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at it, letting it buzz against the counter, trying to decide whether to give it life or let it die in voicemail limbo. Then curiosity won. I swiped the answer and brought it to my ear. Hello. There was a long pause, and then a voice I hadn't heard in months slid through the speaker like a draft under a closed door. Marcus, Greta said. I wasn't sure if this number still worked. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Not smooth, not polished like she used to wield in social settings. It was strained, older somehow, brittle at the edges. I could already tell she didn't call to yell. I kept it. I replied calmly, for situations like this. Another pause. She cleared her throat. Soraya's not doing well. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence expand. I learned that trick from Zarya. Sometimes people fill the quiet with the truth they'd rather avoid. She's been struggling, Greta continued. After the fellowship fell through, the others, they backed off. Doors closed. People she thought were friends gone. It's been hard on her. On all of us. All of us. The same family who told me I didn't know my place. The same people who toasted Soraya as self-made while I stood in the shadows holding receipts no one cared to read. She won't talk to me, Greta said, her voice cracking slightly. She barely eats. Barely leaves the apartment. That sounds tough, I said. Not cold. Just even. Honest. She needs help, Marcus. I let out a breath through my nose. She had help. She had a husband. Greta didn't argue. Maybe she knew she couldn't. Maybe the truth was too loud now to step around it. She made mistakes, she said finally. We all did. But she's still your... No, I cut in gently. She's not. Not anymore. Another long silence. I pictured her in that cold, cavernous house of theirs, drapes drawn tight, holding her phone with both hands like it might shatter. The kind of regret that shows up when applause dies and mirrors reflect too clearly. You said I didn't know my place, I reminded her. You laughed when I tried to speak. You watched me fund her dreams, carry her through med school, and then you smiled when she erased me. I didn't know, Greta murmured, but even she didn't sound convinced. No, I said. You didn't care. There was nothing cruel in my voice. No venom. Just clarity. She's your daughter, I said. Take care of her. I didn't wait for her to reply. I just ended the call. Set the phone face down on the counter. Closed the last box that chapter had ever left open. Zarya peeked around the doorway, eyebrows raised. Everything okay? I nodded. Yeah, just a ghost from a past life. She didn't pry. She just handed me a cup of tea, ginger and honey, and leaned against the counter beside me. I made toast, she said, smiling. You want fig or raspberry? Both, I said. We stood there in the kitchen, warm and still, the kettle hissing softly behind us, and I realized something I hadn't been able to name before. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Soraya. Not at Greta. Not even at myself. I was free. The peace I'd been chasing wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the absence of weight. I no longer carried the responsibility of holding someone else's world together while mine crumbled. I no longer waited for gratitude from people who only saw me as a step towards something better. I had built something new, not out of spite, not from revenge, but from the quiet conviction that I was worthy of love that didn't require proof, respect that didn't come with a price tag. Later that evening, I took a walk down to the shore. The sky had darkened into a rich blue, and the tide rolled in slow and steady. I kicked off my shoes and let the cold water bite at my toes. Somewhere down the beach, a couple tossed a frisbee while their dog barked in wild circles. Nearby, an older man sat on a bench playing a harmonica to no one in particular. I stood there for a long time, listening to the rhythm of the waves. My phone stayed in my pocket. No camera, no captions, just the moment. For a long time, I had believed that value had to be earned, that love was something measured by labor, that if I gave enough of my time, my money, my body, my spirit, I'd finally be enough. But standing there, wind in my hair, salt on my lips, I knew better. I had always been enough. I had just been surrounded by people who couldn't see it. And now, I was surrounded by people who did. Zarya and I didn't rush into anything. There was no proposal, no urgent declarations. Just a mutual understanding. Whatever we built, it would be built together. Brick by brick. Truth by truth. Sometimes she'd joke and say, "So what's the real cost of love, Mr. Quinn?" And I'd smile and say, "Honesty. That's the only currency I accept now." I never replied to Greta again. Never picked up when Soraya tried calling months later. I didn't need apologies or explanations or carefully packaged guilt. I didn't need her pain to justify my healing, because I wasn't seeking closure anymore. I was living in it. One day, maybe Soraya will find her own way. Maybe she'll untangle the pride from the pain. Maybe she'll become someone who understands the depth of what was given to her. But that's not my story to finish. Mine already has its ending. And it's quiet. And it's whole. And it's mine.